Hello everyone. Today I will be commenting on the discussion between Sam Harris and Pastor Doug Wilson. I feel like they are not very famous figures, or maybe not famous enough, so I guess I'll have to give you at least a little bit of overview of who they are and what kind of philosophical and political views they held. So Sam Harris is an American neuroscientist, philosopher, author, and podcast host. His work touches on a range of topics, including rationality, religion, ethics, free will, determinism, neuroscience, and so on. Okay, you see, it's a lot. Let's just skip to his social religious views. What a bit strange way to put it. So he's an atheist. Harris is particularly opposed to what he refers to as dogmatic belief and say that pretending to know things one doesn't know is a betrayal of science, and yet is the lifeblood of religion. There is a lot of discussion about criticism of Islam, and actually he even said that the war on terror is really war against Islam. But let's skip to the important part. Science and morality. Harris considers that the well-being of conscious creatures forms the basis of morality. Okay. In his book, I guess, The Moral Landscape, he argues that science can in principle answer moral questions and help maximize well-being. Harris also criticized cultural and moral relativism, arguing that it prevents people from making objective moral judgments about practices that clearly harm human well-being, such as female genital mutilation. Harris contends that we can make scientifically based claims about the negative impacts of such practice on human welfare, and then withholding judgment in these cases is tantamount to claiming complete ignorance about what contributes to human well-being. Okay, so overall, doesn't sound that bad. So it's quite a reasonable position. His political views are kind of quite conventional, I would say, Democrat. If you look at how he votes, right, he supports Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton as opposed to Bernie Sanders. So he's like center left. In terms of economics, we see he's very much on board with the standard leftist views on raising tax on wealthy and criticize Bill Gates for paying relatively little in tax. Actually, wait. He supports reducing government spending. Well, okay. That's maybe unusual for the usual leftist. He has proposed taxing 10% of the estates worth about $10 million and taxing 50% of the estates worth over $1 billion. So if essentially he supports wealth tax. And then using the money to fund the infrastructure bank. Okay. Then how aligns with reducing government spending? So he's some sort of proponent of mixed system. Okay. So despite being leftist, he still opposes all sorts of political correctness and identity politics, and therefore he was labeled part member of intellectual dark web, along with Joe Rogan, Brett Weinstein, and Jordan Peterson. So okay, I guess that's maybe give you some idea who he is, in case you didn't know him. now with the pastor Doug Wilson. Well, he is how he described himself, Christian nationalist. And in fact, in the first part of this interview, they talk a lot about his views. So actually, I'm not gonna watch the whole interview with you right now because I already watched it, and it's kind of too long to comment on on all of it in its completion and comment on it fully. Yeah, because I just don't know. It's a bit boring sometimes because he talks about different branches of evangelicals in America and what branch he belongs to. So I'll just kind of briefly summarize it for you. He says that he takes the Bible seriously. That's how he put it. Like he called himself Bible fundamentalist. So we will kind of see what does it mean. The first example of it, which I think it's kind of worth mentioning, happens in the debate on the age of the universe. Which is kind of funny question. Look, try
something from the Old Testament, then okay, that's obligatory.
Right.
But they're New Testament centered.
Okay, so just to get my bearings here, so how old do you think the universe is based on your reading of the Bible or any other stream of information?
Yeah, based on my rudimentary math skills, the world is about 6,000 years old.
Okay, so
I'm a young Earth.
Yeah, so
I'm a
that-
young
so-
Earth creationist.
right.
Yes.
Okay, so anyone kind of coming at this from the outside, from secular society, trying to fit you in the canonical debates around the collision between science and religion and evolutionary biology and Christian theology understands which side of that argument you're on.
Right. I'm an anti.
Yeah, look, it's very interesting what kind of comment he adds here.
I'm an anti-Darwinist, young Earth creationist.
Right.
Having said that, and I know that many of your viewers and people who follow you and have read your stuff are going to park me right next to the flat Earth guys, because of that statement of how old the world is. But one of the things that I would just point out in passing is when people say that the universe, the cosmos, is 14 billion years old, or whatever the current number is, they are presupposing a Newtonian balcony somewhere that they get to stand on to watch the whole thing.
Yeah, it's interesting that he feels some need to actually, well, comment on the mainstream consensus, so to say, that he doesn't outright reject it. And I don't know why does he need to do it. Like, is he afraid of being like ridiculed and put next to some sort of flat earth nut jobs? Let's see what he's want to say.
And one of the things that relativity shows us is that time is not what we, my question would be, where is the cosmos 14 billion years old? Is it at the center, at the point of the explosion? Is it at the event horizon? What clock are you using to calculate the age of the Earth? Well, generally, the rudimentary textbook answer is we imagine a Newtonian clock, and it's like an earthbound perspective. And I would say things like time and eternity are not that simple.
Okay, but
yeah, so it's almost seems like as soon as we start talking about anything related to Einstein and relativity theory, it's almost like an excuse to usher in any vagueness and arbitrariness, or we could just say whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. There exists some sort of reference frame in which I'm just right. Yeah, so there is a couple of questions he asked. First of all, about the center and the horizon. This is somewhat a standard misconception about how the universe expands. like the universe doesn't expand from the center, like it's some sort of explosion from one point. It expands more like, like a dough when you cook it, and galaxies are like raisins in it. They the dough just kind of expands from every point. Imagine like every point in space, drifting further apart from each other. And the horizon, which he mentioned, is just also not a physical point in the universe. It's always relative to the observer. It's just the points which are so far away from us that the light emitted from these points will never be able to reach us because of the universe expansion. It's something like this. There are multiple notions of horizons in cosmology, but the idea is similar. So it's not really could stand at the horizon and measure the age of the universe there. But I should say that still some legitimacy to his question, because indeed time is relative to the reference frame, and indeed this number 14 billion years is measured relative to some reference frame. And you could ask, well, which reference frame is this? And you can ask this, and the answer it's the reference frame in which a cosmic microwave background is homogeneous and isotropic. So yes, it's CMB reference frame. So it's kind of special. From this point of view, the Earth's reference frame will be moving with respect to it with a certain speed, and so the age of the universe measured in Earth's reference frame will be slightly different, but that's a minor difference. And we don't really need to have a Newtonian balcony like he described it to give meaning to such terms as the age of the universe. I think the age of the universe in the CMB reference frame, in the reference frame where CMB is homogeneous and isotropic, is a well-defined notion. Yeah, but returning to the point of why he's even bringing this up, it seems like he's either afraid of being ridiculed, or he kind of just think he could beat Sam Harris here, right? Because, okay, like I actually held pretty bad opinion about Sam Harris. I would think that he's kind of very weak. He's always afraid of having any discussions outside of his narrow area of expertise, or making any judgments about it. He is certainly sounds like one of the faithful acolytes of this cargo cult for science. Seems like he wouldn't be able to sneeze without a bunch of experts approving it. So I would thought that he would not be able to answer even this point reasonably. I would think he would just flop here or something. But the answer which he gives is actually quite sound. Look what he said.
Then why would you be tempted to sign on the dotted line with something like 6,000 years old? I mean, when the claim that the world, to take it out of the cosmos for a second and just talk about the rock we're on, to claim that the world is 6,000 years old is to make a fairly straightforward claim about calendar time. I mean, because you're making that claim about, if I said, well, how long ago were the miracles depicted in the Bible? How long ago did they occur? You're saying, okay, walk back a day and another day and another day in the timeline of your life, and then it's before you were born, and then it's about 2,000 years before that. And a year is still a year, still 365 days of the sort that we would recognize. So you have a fairly standard view of time to capture that. And presumably you're walking that all the way back to the beginning, and you just have 6,000 years to deal with.
Right. That is exactly correct. If I go back to Genesis, where it gives us the genealogies, and it says that so and so was the father of so and so, and this he fathered this son when he was 150 years old. It's and there's a whole chain that goes back, and it's just a straightforward math problem.
Yeah, so you see, Sam Harris essentially called him out on this kind of comment because, well, why he's invoking all this relativity stuff here, trying to protect himself is actually he's using the standard Earth time, right? So and he thinks about it as like something similar to like 2000 years to back to Jesus lived and so on. So Sam Harris actually handled it pretty well. Yeah, I think they'll be talking about something like that for a while in the next interesting place. Yeah, this will be about discussion about evangelicals and so on. It's about his views on First Amendment, because people might naively expect him to be like some sort of total theocrat, but he actually said that he supports First Amendment. Yeah, somewhere around here.
And globally,
Can I offer something that might prime the pump, and might just get it out of the way at the beginning? What Christian nationalism is not about fusing church and state. Okay.
So you still like.
Yeah, it's actually a bit surprising for me, because that's how I thought about it. And that's I certainly seen some people advocating for something like this. And I feel like this pastor is kind of behind a lot of these people. He's like intellectual backbone of this movement.
The line from Matthew and elsewhere that you render unto Caesar those things that are Caesar's, and unto God those things that are God's.
That is correct. And so I am a big fan of the First Amendment. Now, and this has to be parsed out carefully, because the First Amendment was addressing the federal level. The only entity that could violate the First Amendment was Congress. Congress shall make no law concerning the establishment of religion. The founders did not want a Church of the United States the way there's a Church of England or the way there's a Church of Denmark.
Right.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly. At the time the Constitution was ratified, 3 of the states came in with hard establishment at the state level. Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire all came in with the Congregational Church. And then when Vermont came in as the 14th state after the Constitution was adopted, they came in with a hard establishment also. Other states like South Carolina had what I would call a soft establishment, where South Carolina said, basically the Protestant religion is the official faith of this state, but there was no connection to any denomination. That would be soft establishment. Now, I believe that a hard establishment at the state level is also a bad idea. I'm against it at the state level also, but it's not an unconstitutional idea, because the states that ratified the Constitution were practicing hard establishment and soft establishment, and they had religious tests for office at the state level, but they were prohibited at the federal level. So I'm in favor of the First Amendment. I applaud the separation of church and state, and I would argue for a separation of a formal separation of church and state at the state level. But then I would, and this would be the place where we'd get into a possible disagreement, I don't think it's possible to separate morality and state. And
well, yeah, that's interesting. Look, what does it actually mean? Like teaching of morality in schools, yeah, but he will say later that he's against public schools. So, and if you support First Amendment, that means there is no censorship. So morality, I guess, is encoded in laws, right? Like what is allowed and not allowed to happen, like what people are allowed, not allowed to do in your state. So yeah, in that sense, indeed, it's not clear what does it mean, how we could separate morality from the state. There certainly was some sort of ideas like this. I heard about them before. For example, this is Popper's open society view, but it's not clear what does it mean in real life, how to realize them. So yeah, I don't know what Sam Harris could say here against it.
As soon as you are talking about morality, you have to answer the question: which one? Which morality?
So, well, I'm sure the devil will be in the details here. Are you saying there would be no religious test to hold public office? I mean, so Muslims and atheists could be members of Congress or become president, or would you then say that how could a Muslim or an atheist have the requisite morality to serve in those offices?
Yeah. What if we were to return to the form of Christian nationalism that we had during the early 19th century, and that's what we had at the founding, was a form of Christian nationalism then.
Yeah, okay. I don't know indeed how the term Christian nationalism is defined, but indeed I checked what he was saying about the religious tests for office holding. Yeah, and that's true. There was a lot of them. However, they were gradually abandoned at the end of the 18th century, and in some cases in the middle of the 19th century. Yeah. Kentucky in 1792 banned ministers from office holding but required the naming of God in its oath, and the state dropped the later requirement in 1799. In 1777 and 1786, Vermont restricted office holding to Protestants who believed in heaven and hell. After becoming a state in 1791, however, it required only belief in God and heaven and hell. Many of the religious tests endured long into the 19th century. Massachusetts ended them in 1833, North Carolina in 1835, and New Jersey in 1844. So, okay. So basically, yeah, they're saying the impact of the federal constitution, the First Amendment, was felt because, while many Americans had already concluded that religious tests were unnecessary or an infringement of religious liberty, no one had argued that they were illegal. So yeah, there was a gradual shift, somewhat initiated by the First Amendment. Yeah, and I would say, I don't know what he's trying to argue for here. It's not very explicit. Maybe he's saying that it was like the best time of America, but I would think, yeah, the America reached a peak kind of later, when this Christian nationalism was somewhat abolished. I don't know. Well, let's see maybe what he's gonna say.
What frequently the states would do is they prohibited public office to someone who didn't believe in God or a future state of rewards and punishments. That was a common phraseology. So they did have religious tests, bare minimum religious tests at the state level, but those were excluded at the federal level. And this is another thing. If we're whiteboarding this and you're asking me to describe the ideal Christian republic 500 years from now, I would sketch out a number of things. We could talk about this Presbyterian utopia 500 years from now. If you ask me what my interest is right now, my interest right now is not to exclude atheists and Muslims right now. We've got bigger fish to fry in the moment. Right. So,
just so that I can understand the significance of that, kind of the way you're introducing time there, you're arguing for a kind of pragmatism and incrementalism on the way to the Presbyterian utopia you would
Yeah.
want to get to. If you could wave a magic wand, you'd get us there immediately, but you know you can't. So you
Right.
want to figure out a path between where we are now and there, right?
That is correct, because I believe that Jesus taught that the way to get from here to there is by peaceful means, preaching, persuasion, church planting, and that's a time you've got to let the bread rise
Right.
before you bake it. And so, consequently, I don't want to do anything in a tyrannical, heavy-handed way.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to go searching for tyranny or the next best thing. What? So let's linger on this phrase Christian nationalism for just another second, because
Yeah, okay. Then they'll be like talking for like 10 minutes about Nick Fuentes and you know, as a people in supposedly the same movement, and I could just kind of skip this part and summarize it briefly that um, this pastor Doug Wilson doesn't support, you know, all sorts of anti-Semitism and also sort of, you know, primitive hate rhetoric, how they call it, coming from Nick Fuentes, so to say. He even said that, well, if Nick Fuentes became president, they will need like a new name for their movement. Then Sam Harris naturally asked him like, okay, but then what's your, if you support First Amendment, what's Christian nationalism actually even mean if you're against all sorts of tyranny? I guess he answered it somewhere here.
hangs in the balance, right? So this is worse than having a pedophile on the playground who can only damage your child for, you know, within the precincts of this life. You're talking about somebody who could, by their serpent's tongue and malicious reasoning, so confuse your child that they would spend eternity in hell.
Yeah, so they're talking about a situation when you have like a secular teacher in your school and he says something which doesn't agree with his Christian faith, and the question to the pastor was like, what are you gonna do with it? If it's like it seems like in Christianity it's just worse than being a pedophile, because yeah, he says, Sam Harris said that pedophile can only hurt your kid, you know, for the finite amount of time, whereas, you know, if somebody convince your kid to abandon faith, then they will suffer for eternity, right?
Just how much can a good Christian be expected to tolerate on that?
Yeah. Why would we crack down on that guy?
Yeah.
So you're forgetting, in my Presbyterian utopia, there would be no public schools. So it's all private education, which means that you would fire that teacher.
Right.
You would say, okay, so you solve that problem immediately. But this is the larger question that you pose is one that I address in my book, Mere Christendom. And the thing that Christians who are too hasty or too eager for the imposition of blasphemy laws. First, before going any further, I would say all societies have blasphemy laws. We call them by different names, but I could go downtown in any major city in America and get arrested within half an hour simply on the basis of what I was saying.
Yeah, I don't know actually. Is it true? I didn't check that.
So it's what you blaspheme, what you're not allowed to blaspheme, not whether you blaspheme. So that's the first thing. But the second thing, from a Christian perspective, is that Christians should never forget that the Lord Jesus was executed on a blasphemy charge. That's why he was killed. Blasphemy. And when we give the government the authority to define blasphemy, what we're doing, in effect, unless we have a robust system of checks and balances, what we're doing is giving them impunity for their blasphemy. All the way through the Scripture, in Old Testament and New Testament, the greatest blasphemers are the state.
Okay, so it's basically he explains his view of the First Amendment and why he supports it. Yeah, but I guess Sam Harris will be pushing into the direction of, okay, when the state should intervene, like is any laws against like what you call sodomy or something like this.
Is the one that is primed to be the greatest blasphemer and to do the greatest damage with their blasphemies. So I want to restrain the state from blaspheming, and that means we have to deal with the village atheist blasphemer with other lesser means, and not. I really want to have resort to the law as a last
Right.
resort.
Well, so then just where does your Christian nationalism, if it were fully accomplished, intrude into the lives of those who don't consider themselves Christian nationalists? So it's take gay marriage and homosexuality generally. What's your take there?
Yeah, let's say if I were, Christian nationalist king for a day, Obergefell would be done. No same-sex mirage at all.
Same-sex couples would not be able to get married. They would not be able to adopt children.
Correct.
Would their sex be illegal and punishable?
You mean the sexual acts?
Yeah, the sodomy or
yeah. So I believe, and this is. Let me frame this first. When I first began ministering in the 70s as a preacher, sodomy was a felony in all 50 states. Now, the point I'm making here is that the America of the late 70s was not a totalitarian hellhole.
Yeah, actually, I was surprised. I didn't know that. Well, at least if you ask AI, yeah, it's like it was prohibited and punished by like 10 to 20 years in prison. So, well, yeah, it's not like it's a totalitarian hellhole, but that's pretty unexpected for me to see something like that in like a civilized nation. And I certainly remember that, the sad story about Alan Turing in Britain. So I guess something similar was happening there. And it is quite tyrannical. I mean, the Turing story is very sad.
But we had laws like that on the books. And what that basically amounted to in practice was the ability of a magistrate, a local municipal police department or whatever, to shut down bathhouses, to have a vice, and that'd be the sort of thing that I'd be interested in, a vice squad that could shut down bathhouses or deal with prostitution.
Although sodomy is not quite the right framing, because obviously sodomy can be accomplished between a man and a woman as well, right? So that presumably should also be illegal and punishable.
That was the case in English and American law.
Right.
That was the case, and it depends on whether you're talking about oral or anal.
Okay, there'll be a discussion of that kind. I don't know how interesting it is, but the thing is, like, he actually supports even death penalty for in some cases. Like, I'm not sure I can find it.
Homosexuality and adultery. There are cases in which you think that could be the maximum biblical sanction could be and should be applied.
Correct. I could envision a circumstance where that could happen. Capital punishment could be applied without injustice. Right. So I can envision that. That doesn't mean, however, that you just have a conveyor belt and you're just gonna apply that sanction woodenly.
Well,
no.
one case does come to mind. I mean, we have a president of the United States who is widely believed to have committed adultery on his current wife just after she delivered their son.
Yes, that he's talking about Donald Trump, and Doug Wilson condemns this. If I could summarize the next a minute for you.
And deserves adultery. A man who will betray his wife will betray anything or anyone. And it's just in the biblical world, it is a very, very serious thing.
Okay, well, what about the rights of women? I think you have, or at least,
I'm for them.
yeah. But what about the right to vote? I think there's been some controversy around this question. Should women be able to vote?
So I mentioned earlier what my agenda would be if I were suddenly making
Hmm.
decisions about what would happen tomorrow. No abortion tomorrow. Obergefell is gone tomorrow. Um, Women and voting is a thornier problem. What I would prefer to see there is something like what we do in our church government. We vote by household. And
Hmm.
so normally, under ordinary circumstances, the head of the household casts the vote for the household. And when the woman is the head of the household, a widow or a divorced woman or a single woman who's out on her own with her own household, she votes in our church elections, she votes as well. So it's not an XXXY chromosome thing. It's a household thing for us. Now, what I would like to do is I'd like the church to practice that kind of polity in church government for a century or two and have people admiring it and seeing how well it works and adopting it gradually and slowly into our civic affairs. So basically the same way that republicanism became small r republicanism became a thing where that polity was beta tested, test driven first in church governments.
Well, okay, so it's an interesting idea. Yeah, I don't know what to say about it. Like the question of voting, as I already discussed before, is not straightforward for me because it's not clear how to justify voting rights. Like if you think about it in terms of some sort of anarcho-capitalist viewpoint, when the government is like a protective company, in order to have voting rights, you have to purchase some stock. Yeah, you have to purchase enough shares in the company when your vote is proportional to your to your portion of stock, right? In that sense, it could be both man and woman. Yeah, but it's hard to tell. That his reasons for it are also, well, they're quite collectivistic. You could see, like, if you just scroll down a little bit.
Each other, then they're just canceling each other out. They might as well just save the gas money and stay home and have a nice steak dinner.
But it just seems there's something strange about the idea that, I don't know, someone like Amy Coney Barrett, right, who's a Supreme Court justice doing the Lord's work, presumably, supporting many the view of many religious people in this country. By virtue of being married, she shouldn't be able to vote or vote her conscience if it differed from her husband's in this scheme.
Yes, it seems the reason this slaps us in the face as being very odd is because we are an atomistic generation. We think that the primary unit of society is the individual, and each individual is like a BB, and then you put all the BBs in a sack, and it's like a big beanbag, so you can push it in anywhere, and then you have certain lax moral things, ubiquitous porn and other things that in effect grease the BBs. I believe I'm a Burkean conservative, and I would go back to Burke's notion of the little platoons. I think a healthy society is a molecular society where each individual bonds in complex molecules with family, extended family, churches, denomination, towns, that sort of thing. You have complex molecules forming. And because we have a sort of a radical individualistic and egalitarian view, we want each individual to cast their sacred vote, and we treat it almost in a sacramental way.
Well, yes, first of all, it's kind of true that I see it, especially on the left, that the voting and also sort of democracy treated as in a sacramental way, and it's actually not clear how they argue for it properly. Yeah, but I don't understand what his reasoning about platoons imply. Well, it's true that in a healthy society, individuals will form some sort of communities around them, right? They will have friends, they'll have families. Uh, that doesn't resolve the question of voting in any way, and it doesn't cancel individualism. Like, yes, it's in my individual interest to have maybe a family and friends. Um, I don't see any contradiction.
Hmm.
So it's like a civic sacrament. I believe that the society would be much healthier if men learned to think of themselves as representing not their own opinions, but rather representing their household.
Hmm.
That so and so if the problem with individualism is this teaching all the individuals to think selfishly instead of in terms of their responsibility to their loved ones.
Well, yeah, but that's clearly his Christian morality kind of kicks in here, right? Because he thinks there's something wrong with selfishness. Uh, in some sense, I could say, well, if it's in my interest to have a family and friends, yes, I am being selfish. It's just like maybe he's using the word selfish in a wrong way. Um, or it seems like maybe there are several meanings of this word. Because I'm fundamentally selfish. I don't know how to be non-selfish in a sense. It seems like the way altruists use the word selfish is like I'm not willing to sacrifice uh, my interest for the interest of others, uh, and I'm not willing to, um, see other people uh, as not just the means for me to achieving my goals, right? Um, so that's maybe the distinction, because I don't know, if you're a selfish person, establishing good relationship with others is still just the optimal means for you to achieving your goals. Um, so yeah, I don't know what the problem here is, um, or what he's trying to say.
Hmm. Well, then what about slavery? Why can't we practice it? I mean, it seems to me, theologically at least, the slave.
Yeah, okay, so here Sam Harris just asks these questions out of nowhere, maybe because he's also kind of confused about where the discussion was going with household voting and this kind of debate between collectivism and individualism, because it wasn't clearly defined here. So yeah, the discussion about slavery also lasts for a long time. Sam Harris essentially kind of mocks Doug Wilson because it turns out Bible doesn't even make a good case against slavery. It kind of embraces it. So Doug Wilson kind of pushes back, saying that, well, it looks like Jesus and Christians were really kind of against it, but they knew it was unrealistic to achieve it at that time in the Roman Empire. So they have to just kind of try to make it more civil. So that's his defense. Now, the next interesting topic is about his views on the government and actually the reasons for the limited government. Because he apparently he said he's some sort of libertarian of certain kind, something like this. Actually, a bit earlier.
One of my baseline convictions is I'm not going to apologize for any sanction that's clearly in the Bible. So when these judgments fell on people back in Moses's Israel,
Yeah, so I marked this one because he is overall pro-freedom, but when it comes to something which was clearly prosecuted in the Bible, he's not apologizing for it. So that's why he's talking about this example.
Right. When there was a man who was executed for picking up sticks on the Sabbath. I'm not going to apologize for that. That was holy, righteous, and good. When someone was executed for the various offenses you mentioned back then, that was holy, righteous, and good. So I'm not going to apologize for anything in the Bible. Now, when it comes to what we are going to do in the light of that, one of the reasons I want to be prudent and careful is not because oh look, there's infidels out there watching us, and we've got to sort of be aware of their progressive gaze. I want to be prudent and careful and slow because the fundamental premise here is the people, the civil magistrates who are running this show are sinners also. So one of the reasons I am such an ardent believer in limited government is because rulers, kings, princes, congressmen are sinners. And when you give them power, the more power you give them, as it says in Federalist 48, says that power is of an encroaching nature. Power wants more power. And I'm just deeply suspicious of the people who want lots of power in order to execute sinners or flog sinners or because oftentimes the people that want to do that are the biggest sinners. So this is one of the reasons why I admire the U.S. Constitution so much, because it is a work of theological genius. The American Constitution has as its underlying assumption, never trust an American.
Yeah, so it's interesting that he's think that this reason is of theological origin, because in some sense it's like linked to some sort of maybe idea of original sin, and we're all sinners, so they have to fundamentally distrust each other. And in a certain way, maybe this argument kind of mimics like in the standard secular argument which libertarians sometimes gives against the big governments, that you're giving some people extra powers with no clear merits, like they haven't earned this power, on the free market through building some corporation and offering best services. They want some sort of popularity contest, and that's just might lead to problems. So yeah, I mean, some objections to this reasoning is that it kind of doesn't take into account, well, it totally omits the question of the government being limited in what sense, right? The proper functions of the limited government. So is it just limited because, we don't want some people to have too much power because, well, it's just dangerous and it's going to become corrupt, or it's because people should be free and we should not be trying to restrict them arbitrarily. So the government is small in terms of what it actually have to do, what it's actually doing to the people. And I think that this important argument is missing from his reasoning, because he's so much focused on this kind of Christian notion of, we're all sinners and we need to seek humility, and why would somebody need so much power, and something like this. Yeah, then after that, well, the next big topic is about abortion and suffering as a, moral norm, like the absence of suffering as a ultimate standard of morality. Yeah, that's what they talk about it.
When we're talking about things like slavery, it would be better for a Black American to be conceived in Charleston in 1855 than in Baltimore in 2025. Right? Your odds are better, your chances are better. So,
well, I think I don't want to, despite the temptation of the invitation, I don't want to open the abortion debate, because I think it'll just take us too long to get it to anywhere like the end zone. I would just point out that in my view, the problem of abortion of a single uh, human fetus at whatever stage uh, is a problem of it's a question of suffering or the absence of suffering. And if there is suffering, I will grant you it's a moral problem. However you look at it, I can't imagine you can believe that there's more suffering entailed by being aborted at whatever the 8 week mark of conception or gestation, when there's more suffering there than in the life of a fully intact person who must live as a slave for years and decades. I mean, there's just simply more suffering there. There's much more experience. There's more good human happiness that person is deprived of, and knows that he or she is deprived of. There's the lash of the whip, etc. So, I mean, the comparison seems specious to me.
I can come with you partway. If the metric were suffering,
right,
then certainly an abortifacient
that would be my metric. Yeah.
An abortifacient that causes a fertilized egg to not implant is an abortion, in my understanding.
Okay,
and there's no suffering,
and that's equivalently that concerns you to the same degree as a murder.
Yeah.
So a single cell not achieving implantation is as much of a moral offense and problem worth avoiding than well, but then
correct.
What do you do with the fact that God is the greatest abortionist of all by that account, because such a high percentage of pregnancies end in miscarriage naturally?
Well, okay, but it's interesting. So, yeah, it seems like Doug Wilson, he think that, okay, so the suffering is not the norm. And because of that, he think that, okay, aborting a fetus is like the same as killing a grown-up adult. But what is the norm is not very clear, because if you see that Sam Harris kind of pushed back on it by saying that, well, okay, is the worst thing which would happen to you in Christianity, you go to hell, and why is it bad then? Isn't it because of sufferings? So yeah, look, I don't remember what it was, somewhere here.
Suffering is not the metric. I think I'm going to follow this thread.
Attracted to the kind of civic polity that I'm talking about are what context do they believe themselves to be living in? They believe themselves to be living in a bloodthirsty culture.
Well, if suffering is not the metric, I think I'm going to follow this thread a little bit longer. If suffering's not the metric, what's wrong with going to hell? Right? I mean, presumably the problem for me, in your view, is that being an atheist of whatever spiritual convictions, my fundamental confusion about the status of the Bible and the status of Jesus and God, etc., is very likely to lead, or if not certainly going to lead, to my spending eternity in a condition of excruciating suffering. Right. Isn't suffering still the cash value of all of that badness in the end?
No.
How so? What's wrong with hell apart from the suffering?
So, okay, so yeah, and then he kind of tried to explain what he mean, but I don't know, it was very vague. I don't know whether you want to watch it. He's trying to say that, well, it's like being separated from God is worse than suffering itself, which, being separated from God is what caused sufferings, and being separated from God just means God didn't give you his forgiveness, something like this. But that is not really a good argument. Like, there's no, and Sam Harris kind of literally sees this, like there's a weakness, because there's no, he could always push back and say, okay, why is it bad? Like, why is it bad to be restricted from God and so on? Like, I don't think there's a clear answer. And yeah, I think like this sort of eternal life in Christianity, like, was always some sort of a crutch for people who recently were selfish and they didn't see any reason to embrace Christianity, because what's there for you if you don't have this? What's there in altruism if you don't have anything for you in the end? So it's kind of it's very strange paradigm for me. So you have to be maximally selfless in your current life for some reason, and then you're hoping that well, you still will get something good out of it in the end. So, well, this is a bit strange, but I assume that's how, any proto-communism would look like in the superstitious times. Like if somebody would, try to propose some sort of communistic ideas in a situation where people just didn't get why they have to be selfless, and instead of trying to give all these arguments about, well, you live in a better society, everyone will be better off, this means you'll be better off, like the arguments which communists try to give today in the modern world, they'll have to invent all these stories about, well, you'll get rewarded in the afterlife. So it seems like just a cheap band-aid. I don't know. So I think this kind of story falls apart because of that. Yeah, actually, they continue this discussion for a long time.
Well, it is the condition that warrants.
Yeah, the warrant.
Presumably, you would find nothing of interest in this part of the debate, right? I mean, there's
Right.
what is of profound interest and of paramount importance to you is based on a belief in eternity. There are two very different outcomes on offer, right? There is
Yeah,
an eternity of
correct.
agony and an eternity of the presumably the opposite of agony, some kind of utterly rapturous and fulfilling proximity to or union with or contemplation of God, right? I mean,
Right.
I'm putting words in your mouth, but presumably I'm not too far off.
No.
It's the difference there that matters. My point is that difference is experiential. The difference is a question of suffering and its antithesis. And so at the end of the day, you too are anchoring your moral worldview to the question of suffering.
Yeah. So Jesus certainly encourages us to begin our thinking at that point. He says, don't fear those who can kill the body only, but fear the one who can throw both body and soul into hell. And fear has to do with punishment. C.S. Lewis says that pain, God speaks to us through a megaphone in pain. So it does begin there. But I think
where does it end? How does it ever escape there? I mean, you got me to, at the end of that contemplation, you got me all the way to agony. With that, well, I'm right back where I started, which is a synonym for suffering.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the problem. And the continuous discussion for a while. So I don't know how much you want to skip it, but there's no really an answer. I don't know. You could listen, because that's literally very accurate what some kind of explained. Like it went back in circle. And I don't know how to patch it up. I think the next interesting moment when Sam Harris kind of directly asked him, okay, what's actually wrong with being atheist? Like, apart from just, the Bible says that they will go to hell somewhere here.
And you might be surprised to hear. We've talked about this a little bit, but I guess I'd like you to just take a clean swing at it. What is wrong with atheism in your view?
Okay. I believe that atheism collapses upon itself. I don't think it's sustainable because if I belong to an apologetics school of thought called presuppositionalism. Okay. And so what I try to do is ask, what kind of universe do I think I'm in? And is my behavior currently consistent with that universe?
I don't know what's meant by consistent, so it's kind of vague, but okay.
Okay. So if I believe that there is no God and that what's going on around me is this concatenation of atoms, cascading down through history, and basically time and chance happen to them all, and this is just the cosmos is 10 tons of confetti dumped into an F5 tornado. It's like Heraclitus, everything is chaos. Then I, a small piece of that chaos, cannot know anything, including that it's chaos.
Yeah, so I don't understand how he arrives at this conclusion. yeah, it's not clear. It's like this total surrender of the mind, because well, we actually were able to learn a lot about the universe, and it's not truth. It's entirely chaotic, right? We have discovered the laws of physics, and we have discovered the laws of chemistry and biology, and we could extend it further to the laws of ethics. We could study morality, and see, what's best for us as humans. So I would say precisely shutting down our mind to these kind of discussions leave us in, fear and uncertainty about what the universe could bring us in the future. So I don't know. I don't see the argument here so far.
Like the fish doesn't know that it's wet. So if there is no God, what kind of cosmos would that necessitate? And if I'm living in that kind of cosmos, then how is it possible for me to know that I'm living in that kind of cosmos? So for me, it's an epistemological question. How do I know? How do I know what I know? How do I know that I'm knowing? And am I actually a knowing being? So if you spill the milk on the kitchen floor and you want to know how it got there, you don't ask the milk. It doesn't know.
So yeah, I don't know. I think he's trying to use a standard kind of loophole that, well, all sort of idealists trying to use. Like, you don't actually have the full justification for the validity of your methods of reason, for the validity of science, in the first place, and therefore, well, what? Therefore, what? We always have a choice to just abandon it, right? Um, because I don't know. When I learned this kind of idealistic philosophies in university, I haven't actually even thought that that's what many people have done. That when they read all those, Kant or something like that, or Hegel, they actually decided to follow these ideas till then, and saying like, okay, it's meaningless to do science then. And then you do what instead? Look, if you do science, well, at least it helps your life. You could have all these technologies and all the pleasant stuff we have today. So it's just like enough justification for me. It seems very strange for me to hear that somebody say, "Well, how do you know you actually learned this?" Like, okay, if I build like a laptop or a phone, that's good enough. I mean, that's it's not clear how will you argue against that.
The accident.
Okay, but in that account, you seem not to be making contact with what it's actually like to be an atheist, right? I mean, so I mean, an atheist is
Well, yeah, actually, maybe he's right in saying this.
a person like yourself who is conscious, who recognizes from the moment of birth forward or thereabouts that there's a range of experience on offer in this condition, and some of these experiences are very pleasant and some are very unpleasant. And once language comes online, we have a common understanding of the world that is both more fundamental and wider reaching than anything in the Bible. In fact, it's only by virtue of having learned language in the first place that you can ever pick up a Bible and read it and get anything out of it. And from an atheist point of view, it's impressive. If that is a work of omniscience, it's impressive how much is not in that book. And when you think of how perfect a book could be if it were written by an omniscient being, and compare that book of your imagination to what actually exists as scripture, the discordance there is also impressive. Which is to say that the greatest book on morality doesn't even get the question of slavery right, or not quite right, and that's a.
But if there is no God, there is no right answer on slavery.
But that's.
Well, actually, yeah, and this is also quite typical, and I've seen this a lot in all sorts of religious discussions. This thesis that there is no God, there is no objective morality, and I would say the discussion about objective morality is not simple. Yeah, uh, it's not like the answer is immediately obvious to me. Well, it's like we have to think indeed, what do we as humans have in common, and uh, and what are the differences we have? That yeah, we all need like food and water to survive. Yes, there's certain things we all need to thrive, and we certainly could compare political systems based on how well they satisfy those needs. So this is quite objective, yeah. And of course, if we go further and start asking questions like, well, one person could prefer this type of music, other person prefers that type of music, and vice versa, and someone doesn't like music at all. What does it mean for morality? Or what's good for me? What is it? How different it could be from person to person. So I don't know how exactly separate the objective part from individual part here, but I think the objective part clearly exists. And what's more unclear here, why it has to be tied to God. Like, I don't know how this religious thinking works exactly. It seems like they just link it themselves for some reason. That if just like God gives birth to everything in the universe, it also gives birth to humans and their morality, therefore. Um, but I don't know, maybe it's just like kind of inconceivable for the religious person what does it mean to have no God. And it's partially what Sam Harris said, like, you're not actually connecting to the atheist thinking. Uh, it's some sort of straw man, I don't know.
That's simply not true because, again, we have this universe that admits of very, very positive experiences and very, very negative ones. And you and I are united in our preference for the former, right? If there is a heaven to go to and a hell yawning beneath, I certainly would want to be in that heaven just as you would want to be in that heaven because I care about the difference between eternal torment and eternal satisfaction.
But the
So,
nerve endings, Sam, the nerve endings of all the sentient beings that are not hooked up together. So consequently, there's no such thing as the collective amount of pain that's going on because the nerve endings, the experience of pain is discrete.
Yeah, I don't understand why he even referred to collective amount of pain. If I only care about myself as an individual, yeah, just it's about my pain or absence of pain. So it's more like what's important is that it's similar from one human body to another. So we could say what's better and good for me and for humans in general. So I don't
In
know.
all the different individuals that have those nerve endings.
right.
And so consequently,
Well,
I
in that it's
can't,
not shared, but there's still we can still talk about, for certainly certain purposes, we can talk about collective experience, right? If you have 10 people in a room and they all have a similar experience of it's being too hot in the room and where's the thermostat, we can play that language game and we're not driven insane by it. We know the room's too
sure,
hot and that's because all 10 of us are sweating, right?
right. And so someone proposes, okay, there's 10 of us here. Let's enslave this guy and make him guard the thermostat. Right.
Right.
So,
Which would be permitted by the Bible, I would point out, but not by my secular morality.
My question is, why wouldn't it be allowed by your secular morality?
Because there are consequences to a practice like that, and in the full analysis, we can agree, or rational people can agree that certain consequences are worse than others. And if at
Not
any
for
point,
me. Not for me.
well, no, because like no one wants. Again, this is like a classic attack on consequentialism. The idea that, well, on the consequentialist account, if it's all about just the greatest good for the greatest number, why can't your doctor, when you show up for a physical, why can't your doctor, knowing that he's got five other patients who could use your organs, Why can't he just, bring you into his back room and, knock you
And take
out and
them.
vivisect
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, but that's actually already presupposes agreement of some sort of utilitarianism, right? That this argument which you make is that the moral is some sort of maximization of the total good, which is already kind of not individualistic. And I don't know, like Sam Harris has to explain separately why he even starts from it. But the rest of the argument still kind of makes sense, I would say.
And deliver your organs to the 5 needy patients who are waiting
Right.
for them. Well, okay. In the tightness of that frame, you may imagine it's hard to argue against that on consequentialist terms because you've got 1 dead person and 5 people who've been saved. But
Right.
if you look at the larger footprint of those of the consequences of that practice, if you look at what it would be like to live in a society where all of us knew at any time we might be yanked out of the waiting room and vivisected, murdered by our own doctors who we've entrusted to keep us healthy because someone else needs our organs, exactly no one would want to live in that society for good reason.
Right.
It would be a society of terror and distrust, right?
No, that's why you don't tell them.
Well, no, but again, it's still a society of terror and distrust. The moment
No,
that,
you don't tell them. It's not terror and distrust if nobody tells them.
of course, because people would be disappearing under those conditions. Where's mom? Mom went to the doctor. Why didn't she come back? Oh, she died in the doctor's office because we stole her organs. Right? This is not the way the world works. We are collectively entangled in all sorts of ways where certainly most of the time, I'll grant you can create corner conditions where the temptation for torture or the temptation to scapegoat or to mistreat the single person for the benefit of the mob can be sharpened up to a point where it can be harder and harder to argue against it in that limited case. But in general, we know that all of these boats rise with the same tide, right? And we know that there are practices that we know that each of us, most of the time, are better off in a fair society rather than a radically corrupt one, even though we can point to the instance of corruption that would work to our private advantage, right? So you can argue for these compromises and trade-offs because you just have a larger footprint of consequences that you're rationally evaluating.
Right. So I agree with you that if mom went to the doctor for a hangnail and her condition took an unfortunate turn, that'd be obviously ridiculous. And I also agree with you that the consequentialist hypotheticals can be expanded to the point where it'd be hard for the consequentialist to argue on their own terms. For the Christian, I do agree that it's far better to live in a fair-minded society that cares about justice. What I would maintain, however, is that we need to define justice. What is it, and why do we define it a certain way? What moral system does it arise out of, and is it obligatory on people who don't have that moral system? So if we have the Kantian ethic, the categorical imperative, or utilitarian ethic, I'm a Christian. I'm not a Kantian. I'm not a utilitarian. Why am I bound by this?
Well, I think you are. I mean, again, I would argue that you are. Utilitarian is not quite the right word given some of the associations, but the more generic term, consequentialist, I think is. And I would argue that you and everyone else, when you really drill down on what you care about and what you could conceivably care about, you are a consequentialist. And if you care about the difference between eternity in hell and with its agony and its just desserts and eternity with God, you are talking about consequences, the consequences of living rightly within the law as you believe it to exist. Now, whether you're right about whether we live in such a universe, that remains to be seen. But and I think there are reasons to believe you're not. But if you were right, again, what you care about in that scheme is consequences.
Right. Now, here's the question that I would have for you. If you look back over human history, and you look at all the tyrants and despots and criminal warlords and whatnot,
Hmm.
who we would say on a human level got away with it,
Yeah.
right? Um, they maintained power until they died. They abused. Um, they got away with it, and they got away with all kinds of rape and pillage and everything. And they died 200 years ago. We look at that person and say, there is no judgment. There is no reckoning for that person. That person bet wisely or luckily. Right. He landed on his feet.
Okay, but you see what you're walking into here, because
Well, it's actually not clear because we don't know how happy he actually was in the first place. It's not clear whether he suffered or not in, well, this kind of, in his kind of life. So it's not that obvious.
on your account, salvation has nothing really at the end of the day to do with a person's behavior. I can find you an atheist who behaves impeccably, better than 99.9% of Christians. His whole life does nothing but donate blood and donate money and he comfort the.
Yeah, so by better he means like in the Christian sense. So he's still gauging people's action by the adherence to the same altruistic morality, which essentially comes from Christianity. Well, okay, it might have existed before, but it's interesting to see that Sam Harris, who rejected Christianity, at least, literally, still embraces to some degree the same moral views in terms of what's good and what's bad.
Dying, etc. But because he's an atheist, he's going to spend eternity in hell. And I can find you a rapacious psychopath who, on death row, comes to Jesus in the most impeccable fashion in the last hours of his life after having raped and killed and tortured,
Right.
and being put to death by a duly constituted secular state. But he's being put to death having found Christ in those last moments,
Right.
found him fully, found him without residue. He will spend eternity in heaven.
Right.
That makes a mockery of any distinction we would make in as a matter of terrestrial morality.
Right. So I said earlier that heaven was a gift and that hell was a paycheck.
Mhm.
And so your scenario is the thief on the cross received the gift. He was a scoundrel, and it was a deathbed conversion with no bed, and he was forgiven. Today you'll be with me in paradise. And someone else was a moral, upright citizen, always did all what was expected of him, and so forth, and is lost eternally because he didn't have Christ. Yeah, I embrace that. I embrace that. I embrace that.
But I'm just saying that it interacts unhelpfully with the rejoinder you were just putting forward, which is all these awful people in the past are not going to be judged. In my view, in my worldview, they got away with murder quite literally. But
Right.
I'm pointing out all the circumstances where good Christians at the end can get away with murder all the while, and the best people who've ever lived in terms of their terrestrial morality will spend eternity in hell just because they didn't believe the right things about God.
So you agree that both our positions have people in them who get away with murder?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Now, what I'm saying is the person who got away with murder,
or seem to. I mean, I honestly don't know what happens after death, and
Yes, but the question is, which one is more merit-based? I would say in the secular morality, the punishment is way less arbitrary. Of course, this evil tyrants which they're talking about, they didn't live in capitalist world. So yeah, the system of justice which we built is not automatic, and it's true. Like we take some work to maintain it and to reach it. So yeah, whereas Christianity just allows us arbitrariness, which he described, like sinner could be forgiven randomly. So it seems like the secular system is still superior.
what the, obviously if I were a Buddhist, I don't consider myself one, although I've gotten a lot of wisdom from Buddhism. In a Buddhist framework, you have a very different way of accounting for all of this, and no one gets away with anything. But
yeah, okay. So then he talks about Buddhism a lot, and I think the last segment they'll be talking about how Christianity treats other, messiahs, all sorts of magicians, and so on, and why that Jesus anyhow special. So the Sam Harris brings this example of some sort of recent Indian, I don't know, guru or some guy who's doing some magic tricks and asks Doug Wilson why is that Jesus anyhow more credible than this Indian guy, despite the fact that Jesus lived 2,000 years ago and the accounts of his magical tricks are less direct. They're further extended both from us and even from Jesus' life. And the answer which he gives is actually mostly in its essence was tied to Jesus' moral teachings. Well, his point was something like there is so much I could find in Jesus' moral teachings that I kind of could not believe that he was like a cheater or liar. So I guess it just has to be true that he's a son of God and something like this. And what he's saying is true because I see, a lot of truth in his moral teachings, which kind of means that in the end, even Christians, like they care about Jesus' ideas first and foremost, not his magical powers, which is actually maybe to some extent a bit unexpected, because for me, Jesus, well, okay, he was just one of the philosophers, one of the thinkers. We could look at his ideas, accept some of them or reject them, and just kind of move on. But for religious people, he's not just a thinker. He's more like a sacramental figure. Christianity is some sort of a cult of Christ, right? I mean, that's I guess what it is. And there is no really good reasons for it. It's more like indeed, I guess they just so attracted to his moral teachings that they believed even in this kind of magical stories. Yeah, okay. I think that's overall approximately the end of the interview. Like,
There was something I'd want to go to Lewis's trilemma here. This guy, to
yes.
Lewis again, I don't believe that pagans can do nothing. I don't believe that it's all empty and hollow over in paganism. I believe that they inhabit the spiritual world also, and many of them are more in tune with that spiritual world than many Western materialist Christians are.
Doug Wilson, it's been an education. Thank you so much for your time. Great to meet you.
Well, thank you, and it was a pleasure being on your podcast. Thank you.
Nice. Well, I'm sorry I kept you so long, Doug, but there was a lot to cover, and we could have gone 2 more hours.
Well, Sam, can I tell you one thing before I go?
Sure.
That was the best interview I've had in years.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Thank you. That was just really fair-minded. I really appreciate it. That was really good.
I just want to know what you think, so I tried to get there. So
not everybody does want to know.
Yeah. Well,
thank you.
Take care, Doug.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. So in general, I don't know whether I should add anything here. But in my opinion, this whole concept of, morality and state built on religion, yeah, morality built on religion and a state built on this religious morality is actually unstable, unlike what he's saying about atheism. And I actually even see it in history. We see it even in American history, in a sense that religion wasn't completely excluded and exterminated from, the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence or from all the original American ideas, and they were kind of tied to God, and that made them weak in a certain sense. You could see, I point out this one problem that for some reason natural rights and objective morality was tied to God, like arbitrarily. And then when the idea of God was undermined by the Darwin, I don't know, with all those evolutionists, morality was questioned. And that's would be always the case. If you were able to establish a somewhat, reasonable society where people overall are allowed to reason, which is what they need for flourishing, um, what's going to happen eventually? They will apply the reason even to, the fundamental ideas on which the society was built upon. They will question these moral beliefs, and if you don't have good reasons for them, there is a chance they could be abandoned, because that's just not how human brain works. Um, Look, I found this story recently. I read it accidentally. It's a story, some ancient Irish legend. It's called Oisín an Tirna Nog, the land of youth. So what happened is the story: Oisín, a legendary warrior, lives in a magical realm of Tirna Nog with Niam, where no one ages. He eventually longs to return to Ireland to see his family, the Fianna. And Niam, his wife, I guess, gives him a magical white horse, Enbar, for the journey, but warns him never to dismount or let his feet touch the ground. Okay, now, well, guess what happens? So, when Oisín returns, he finds that 300 years have passed and his friends are long gone. So, I mean, the beginning of the story, like, he was wounded in the battle, and this Niam, she picks him up and brings him to this land of youth. So, okay, so he returns and sees that all his friends are gone. While helping men move a stone, he falls from the saddle. As soon as his feet touch Irish soil, the enchantment breaks and he instantly ages the 30 years he missed, turning into a frail, blind old man and dies shortly after. So, yeah, it's mentioned here that he fell from a saddle by a mistake, but in certain variations, I've seen that he actually just chose to step down. He just disobeyed his wife. And which one is true is not that important, because the lesson is still the same. Like, he didn't know why he was not supposed to do it. She didn't give him a clear reason how this well, why he shouldn't do it, like, and clear explanation how this magical horse actually works. If he knew that he would die, he probably choose not to have this old man and, risking his life. He would know what at stake. He chose to risk because this was just an arbitrary taboo for him. This wife's words, like this warning. So that's why in the critical moment, when this warning was put to test, he just abandoned it. He just violated it. So the same happens, I think, with any religious dogmas. You actually violate them if you don't have good reasons for them. We kind of see it happening in the Christian world. It's not like they adhere to them literally. In some sense, it's kind of impossible to adhere to them literally, and this is the reason why we even had the Dark Ages in the first place, and why the reason itself was shut down by Christians eventually, because as soon as you allow reason, well, you're allowed to question everything. You can't stop it. People start asking questions about, well, why is it I have to sacrifice myself? If I have to, how much? To what degree? Like, do I have to not eat because eating food means I'm taken away from somebody else? If I just die, is it the best service to God or not? So even within this framework, there are inconsistencies which could be exploited by a person with reason. So eventually, I remember that Saint Augustine, even within his lifetime, he realized that, and he um, decided to explicitly abandon reason and embrace pure faith, like that we shouldn't ask these questions. But well, that didn't end well. That resulted into thousands of years of religious obscurantism and persecutions of any scientists or philosophers. And I don't know whether Doug Wilson would like to return us back to this era, because his remarks in this interview were kind of vague. He didn't explicitly explain, how bad it gets. Certainly, from this remarks that the person could be killed for working or picking sticks on Shabbos, yeah, seems like it's very much moving us into this direction. Um, but anyway, I don't know how dangerous this movement could be, depending on how popular it is. For me, I would say that those kind of utilitarian, nominally secular altruists like Sam Harris are still somewhat dominant in the society. So I would fear them more. At least they led to more problems today. But this might change in the future, and it always could get worse.